previous modules have been dedicated to connecting the dots with your student in regards to how each of you is situated systemically, emotionally, socially, cognitively, culturally. This is crucial for understanding where to begin and what to focus on when you start tutoring. But until now, your training has been limited with regards to practical tools you can use in your lessons. And the next few modules will serve to offer these tools. This module, we will revisit the 4Cs model, described in the Cognitive Development module, and will give you practice in goal tracking. So RALP tutors come from a variety of backgrounds, and not everyone has prior experience as an educator. If you are familiar with lesson planning, that is great. If this is your first time in an educator role, then welcome. No matter your skill level, working individually with an adult literacy student is a unique scenario, and it will take you some time before you feel proficient. Even then, you'll always be wanting to find new ways to improve your approach. But we can give you some tools to reach this proficiency more quickly. Think of them as training wheels as you get the hang of tutoring and build trust with your student. In this module, we'll be covering the following topics: lesson planning structure, using assessment and lesson plans to customize your lessons, frameworks for planning your first year, communities of practice and commitment. Before we get started though, I want you to make a lesson plan for your first 1-hour lesson with your student. I know what you may be saying, we haven't learned to do that. Yes, and that's the point. I want you to have a starting point. So while we go through this module, you can refer to the plan and to the plan that you're making now to see what you might do differently based on what you're learning. Take as much time as you want, but give yourself at least 10 minutes to give an honest effort to this lesson plan. Pause this video and make your lesson plan. When you're done, press play to move on to the next module. Have fun, and then don't worry about getting it wrong. You can't. So let's cover the basics of planning a lesson. For simplicity, objectives, and the 4C structure. As we've covered in previous modules, it takes a lot of brain power to learn how to read, write, and speak. Not only that, but there's so much going on in everyone's life, both yours and the students. Because of this, the hour you spend in tutoring should be straightforward and reasonably predictable. Cut down on the things taking yours and your students' attention, and you can both focus on the skill or strategy of the day. Think of your lesson plan like a Zen garden, creating spaciousness with a curated structure and featuring just 1 or 2 elements that make an impact. Next is your objective. Now it's important to have a measurable objective in mind so you can create your plan to achieve this objective, and you can gauge effectiveness of the plan based on whether this objective was met or not. To make an objective, follow these 4 steps. Identify the noun or the thing you want your student to learn. Example, say you want your student to learn 7 steps of the research process. Identify the level of knowledge that you want. In Bloom's taxonomy, which you can see below and which you can find in your resource folder, there are 6 levels of learning. And it's important to choose the appropriate level of learning because this directly influences the type of assessment you choose to measure your students' learning. Example, to know the 7 steps of the research process, that's a comprehension level, that is knowing. Select the verb that is observable to describe the behavior at the appropriate level of learning. So, for example, to describe the steps of the research process. Add additional criteria to indicate how or when the outcome will be observable, to add context for the student. Describe the 7 steps of the research process when writing a paper. Now to the 4 Cs. we recommend structuring your lesson around the 4-phase learning cycle we covered in our cognitive development module, known as the 4 C's. Let's go over them again. 1. Connections. Students make connections with what they already know or think they know about a topic. Now in this module, we did that step when we had you create your own lesson plan. Then it's 2, concepts. Students take in new information in multisensory ways. That's this part of the module. I'm describing the concepts. You're getting the concepts. Concrete practice then is when students actively practice the skill using new information, participating in active review of what they learned. That's the third thing, concrete practice. And that will be our next step, so get ready. 4, conclusion. And this is where the learners summarize what they learned, evaluate it, and make a commitment to apply it to their lives, perhaps ending with a short celebration. Make sure you celebrate when you're done with this training too. Okay, so you're ready for the concrete practice. So far in this module, we've talked about these concepts, the importance of a simple and consistent structure, clear objectives, and the use of the 4C model. Take a look at the lesson plan you made at the beginning and practice these concepts. Start by asking yourself these questions. Is the lesson plan simple? Can I repeat its structure consistently? If not, how can I simplify the structure? Does this lesson plan have a clear objective? And if not, what should that objective be? Finally, does this lesson plan follow the 4 C's? And if not, can you add connections, concepts, concrete practice, and a conclusion? But don't just ask the question. Answer them by changing your lesson plan accordingly. Pause the video to work on this and then press play when you're ready to move on. Okay, so now we're adapting student lessons to student needs. Now that you've made your lesson plan, let me ask you a question you may have already asked yourself. Who is this plan for? Of course, you don't have a student, so it can't be for anyone, but I want you to at least imagine the student who would benefit most from your lesson. What's their skill level? What are their needs? What are their interests? Pause and write down a profile of this imaginary student, then hit play when you're done to keep going. It's important to know your student because that's who you're planning for. As you get to know your student, you will be able to create plans that are more and more accurate to their needs, interests, and skill levels. It takes time to get to know your student. You can't be expected to respond to all their needs and interests and skill levels right off the bat. And as with any relationship, that's just going to be a matter of consistent effort and persistence. But here are a few tools that will help jumpstart your process. First of all, we have TABE. We are required by the state to test all students using the Test for Adult Basic Education, or TABE. And this is a standardized test that gives a general perspective of your student's level. Because standardized tests can be anxiety-provoking, and the TABE doesn't really focus on adult literacy, you should see this assessment as a necessary but blunt instrument, and it should only be your starting point. As you can see from the chart, TABE test results correspond with several other types of scores. On the right side, there's the TABE score, and then you have the grade level, and then you have what is known as the NRS level, and that stands for National Reporting System. And you have learning progressions. This is a tool to assess your student's skill level in a more nuanced and responsive way. You can start with the assumption that your student is in the level defined by the TABE, and then use this tool to sort of refine that assumption. And at the end of the lesson, at the end of each lesson, take a look at these categories and see which is most true for your student's skill for that category. So take a second to work this out using your learning progression tool. Let's say your student gets a 530 on their language and a 550 on their reading test. What is their NRS level? Now, look through the learner progression table and imagine a scenario where your student may have several levels at once. Now, for example, they may be able to analyze and order the information in a text, but they struggle with reading it fluently. Pause the video and spend a few minutes writing down this scenario, imagining a fictional student who has multiple skill levels. Then determine how you could develop lesson plans to support their advanced skills while also growing their newer skills. Last, but definitely not least, these scores and numbers don't mean a lot if you can't apply them to your student's life. As such, we've got to ask the student where they want to focus. Your student is the expert in their own lives, and although they may not use the language of NRS levels, they can tell you what they want and need. This is an area where you want to be aware of the social-emotional elements of your relationship. Your student may not be prepared to open up to you right away. They will learn to trust you over time. Nevertheless, we want to use this tool from the outset. This learner plan prompts your student to identify personal and professional goals that they want to accomplish through your work. Use this plan to break those goals into bite-sized lesson plan objectives that can transform your student's educational process. Again, if they aren't ready to answer some questions that you ask them, let them open up to you over time. But we will use the information in this plan as data to supplement the tape levels. We want you to keep a learner plan and update it regularly with us every 3 months to measure how you are making progress toward your and your students' goals. Let's watch this video to drive home the idea of breaking goals into smaller pieces.
By a show of hands, how many of you believe you could replicate this image of Brad Pitt with just a pencil and piece of paper? Well, I'm going to show you how to do this. And in so doing, I'm going to give you the skill necessary to become a world-class artist. And it shouldn't take more than about 15 seconds. But before I do that, how many of you believe you could replicate this image of a solid gray square? Every one of us. And if you can make one gray square, you can make 2, 3, 9. Truth of the matter is, if you could make just one gray square, it'd be very difficult to argue that you couldn't make every gray square necessary to replicate the image in its entirety. And there you have it. I've just given you the skill necessary to become a world-class artist. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not real art. Certainly wouldn't make me a world-class artist. So let me introduce you to Chuck Close. He's one of the highest earning artists in the entire world for decades, and he creates his art using this exact technique. You see, what stands between us and achieving even our most ambitious dreams has far less to do with possessing some magical skill or talent, and far more to do with how we approach problems and make decisions to solve them. And because of the continuous and compounding nature of all those millions of decisions that we face on a regular basis, even a marginal improvement in our process can have a huge impact on our end results. And I'll prove this to you by taking a look at the career of Novak Djokovic. Back in 2004, when he first became a professional tennis player, he was ranked 680th in the world. It wasn't until the end of his third year that he jumped up to be ranked third in the world. He went from making $250,000 a year to $5 million a year in prize money alone, and of course he did this by winning more matches. In 2011, he became the #1 ranked men's tennis player in the world, started earning an average of $14 million a year in prize money alone, and winning a dominating 90% of his matches. Now here's what's really interesting about all of these very impressive statistics. Novak doesn't control any of them. What he does control are all the tiny little decisions that he needs to make correctly along the way in order to move the probability in favor of him achieving these types of results. And we can quantify and track his progress in this area by taking a look at the percentage of points that he wins. Because in tennis, the typical point involves 1 to maybe 3 decisions. I like to refer to this as his decision success rate. So back when he was winning about 49% of the matches he was playing, he was winning about 49% of the points he played. Then to jump up, become number 3 in the world, and actually earn $5 million a year for swinging a racket, he had to improve his decision success rate to just 52%. Then to become not just number 1, but maybe one of the greatest players to ever play the game, he had to improve his decision success rate to just 55%. Now, I keep using this word just. I don't want to imply this is easy to do. Clearly it's not. But the type of marginal improvements that I'm talking about are easily achievable by every single one of us in this room. And I'll show you what I mean. From kindergarten all the way through to my high school graduation, yes, that's high school graduation for me, every one of my report cards basically said the same thing. Stephen's a very bright young boy. If only he would just settle down and focus. What they didn't realize was I wanted that even more than they wanted it for me. I just couldn't. And so from kindergarten straight through the second year of college, I was a really consistent C minus student. But then going into my junior year, I'd had enough. I thought, I want to make a change. I'm going to make a marginal adjustment. And I'm going to stop being a spectator in my decision-making and start becoming an active participant. And so that year, instead of pretending again that I would suddenly be able to settle down and focus on things for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time, I decided to assume I wouldn't. And so if I wanted to achieve the type of outcome that I desired, doing well in school, I was going to actually have to change my approach. And so I made a marginal adjustment. If I would get an assignment, let's say read 5 chapters in a book, I wouldn't think of it as 5 chapters. I wouldn't even think of it as 1 chapter. I would break it down into these tasks that I could achieve that would require me to focus for just 5 or 10 minutes at a time. So maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, that's it. I would do that. When I was done with those 5 or 10 minutes, I would get up. I'd go shoot some hoops, do a little drawing, maybe play video games for a few minutes. And then I'd come back. Not necessarily to the same assignment, not even necessarily to the same subject, but just to another task that required just 5 to 10 minutes of my attention. From that point forward, all the way through to graduation, I was a straight A student. Dean's List, President's Honor Roll, every semester. I then went on to one of the top graduate programs in the world for finance and economics. Same approach, same results. So then I graduate. I start my career, and I'm thinking, this worked really well for me. You know, you take these big concepts, these complex ideas, these big assignments, you break them down to much more manageable tasks. And then along the way, you make a marginal improvement to the process. You nudge the odds of success in your favor. I'm going to try and do this in my career. So I did. I started out as an exotic derivatives trader at Credit Suisse. It then led me to be global head of currency option trading for Bank of America, global head of emerging markets for AIG International. It helped me deliver top-tier returns as a global macro hedge fund manager for 12 years and to become founder and CIO of 2 award-winning hedge funds. So it gets to 2001, and I'm thinking, this whole idea, it worked really well in school. It's been serving me well as a professional. Why aren't I applying this in my personal life? Like to all those big, ambitious goals I have for myself. So one day, I'm walking to work, and at the time, my commute was a walk from one end of Hyde Park to the other in London. It took me about 45 minutes each way. Hour and a half a day, 7.5 hours a week, 30 hours a month, 360 hours a year when I was awake, aware, and basically wasting time listening to music on my iPod. So on my way home from work that day, I stopped at the store. I picked up the first 33 CDs in the Pimsleur German language program, ripped them and put them onto my iPod. But I didn't stop there. Because the truth of the matter is, I'm an undisciplined person. And I knew that at some point, I'd switch away from the language and go back to the music. So I removed that temptation by removing all of the music. It left me with just one option: listen to the language tapes. So 10 months later, I'd listened to all 99 CDs in the German language program, listened to each one 3 times each. I then went to Berlin for a 16-day intensive German course. When I was done, I invited my wife and kids to meet me. We walked around the city. I spoke German to the Germans. They spoke German back to me. My kids were amazed. I mean, that couldn't close their jaws. But you and I, we know there's actually nothing amazing about what I just done. I made this marginal adjustment to my daily routine, this marginal adjustment to my process. Und jetzt, ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. And now I can speak some German.
The key with writing these goals is to take down not only their life, career, and academic goals, but the goals you need to set on the way to reaching those big goals. Use all the information you gather throughout your process of getting to know your student. The assessments, the NRS levels, your social-emotional work, the cultural context and funds of knowledge, the obstacles you experience in the course of tutoring, to start zeroing in on the student's immediate literacy needs. In following lessons, we will give you even more tools for pinpointing a student's needs in the areas of phonics, reading, and writing. And we will also provide you with ready-made mini lessons for building skills around those areas. But for now, let's do some practice. Let's look at the student we looked at before, the one with mixed skill levels, that fictional student you were imagining. They are able to, say, analyze and order the information in a text, but they struggle to read it fluently. They state their long-term goal is to get in a good office job. How would you use this goal sheet to break down their goal, to focus on their needs? Practice the goal sheet on yourself as well. What are your life goals? What are the things that you need or want to learn in order to get to those goals? How would you track these in a goal sheet? How would you translate the work you need to do over 1 month, 6 months, or 1 year objectives? So now you can make a lesson plan for a single session, and you can evaluate your student to make sure these lesson plans fit their needs and interests. But can you sustain this? We have included 2 tools to help you craft a long-term vision for your lesson plans. The first one, shared with us from Victoria Henry at UNM Taos Adult Literacy Program, is a ready-made lesson plan framework. Not only does she provide several months of lessons, but she's also created detailed lesson plans that you can follow or adapt. These are included in the resource folder. Pause this video and take some time to read through those now. I've stripped down Victoria's framework, which you'll find in the activity folder, so you can use it to craft a series of lessons that achieve long-term objectives. Try it now with the lesson plan you did earlier. I know this is working kind of backward from the way you'd be doing it here, but try to imagine a long-term goal that your lesson plan can play a role in achieving. What other skills and questions will you need to pose to ensure that goal is accomplished? How will you and your student culminate all the lessons to demonstrate the larger goal has been met? Pause this video now to sketch your thoughts for this long-term goal into your plan. Now we are starting to use all that information gathered through the lessons in the first modules to create custom-made lesson plans around a student's goals and learning needs. In the next 2 modules, we'll zero in on some of the specific needs a student is likely to have, such as phonics, reading, and writing skills, and resources for pinpointing and meeting those needs.